Traders, how are you? Marcello here, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today, we're going to be doing the recap of what happens in the markets last week. Overall this week, we first had a situation where on Monday there was fresh all-time highs in each one of the exchanges, the Dow, the S&P 500, and also the NASDAQ. Investors are actually hoping for a rebound in the second half of 2019 of stocks, but it largely depends on the guidance of a lot of these companies in coming weeks. Remember that we're in July, so now the reports of the second trimester, I said it in Spanish, the second quarter is going to come out. So now we have the first and the second quarter, and the problem is now that we have a looming slowdown in global growth, and the expectation of what the revenue is going to be and the results of these companies isn't good, essentially, right? To sum it up. So they're anticipating an earnings growth in quarter two to be essentially flat, right, compared to last year, a lot of analysts. And the problem is, even in the S&P 500, for example, that 40% of profits of these firms are made overseas. So the economy isn't doing that well, global economy. We're getting bad economic news from a lot of places, especially places like China, for example, which is the second largest economy in the world. So probably not going to get very good results, which means if the stock market or the prices of stocks are based on a lot of times this guidance, which literally is going to start coming out now, probably not going to see that much of a rebound in the second quarter. The three major stocks, Dow, S&P 500, and the NASDAQ rose again, went down on Tuesday when Trump said that he could impose more tariffs on China, reminding investors that we still had a trade dispute with the first and the second largest economies in the world. Stocks finished lower on Wednesday, negative for the second day in a row. Thursday, they went up, but they closed lower on Friday as geopolitical worries, particularly in the Persian Gulf. And then the U.S. indices for the week, the Dow went down 0.66%. The S&P 500 went down 1.24%, and the NASDAQ went down 1.20%. In international news, the European markets, the Swiss market went up 1.78%. The biggest winner, the biggest loser was Russia with 2.58%. And Istanbul, again, was one of the biggest winners at 4.89%. And let me just reiterate, Russia was the biggest loser at negative 2.58%. I think I said it backwards there. And Istanbul is an emerging market, so generally, I think I'm going to just add that one on as well, because Istanbul for the last few weeks has been the biggest winner, the loser, but obviously in an emerging market, it kind of overshoots when it goes up or down. In Latin American markets, the Merval in Argentina is the biggest loser at 6.45%. And in Africa and Middle Eastern markets, South Africa was up 1.70%. And Nigeria, which is the biggest economy in Africa, went down by 2.32%. In Asia and Australian markets are mixed for the most part. The Japanese Nikkei went down by 1.02%, and the Philippines went up 1.57%. Shout out to all my traders in the Philippines, since we got all of our operations going out there. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency news, the Libra, Facebook's new cryptocurrency, they're saying, Facebook, that it's going to be stable and adopted, universally accepted is what they said, not adopted. So there's a little bit of a scuffle going on now, because now the regulators are fearing that everybody's going to start using cryptos because of this. So regulators are essentially saying that it's still largely unregulated, the crypto market, and also there still needs to be a situation where the user data problem, it needs to be resolved as well. German Finance Minister Olaf Scholz, I hope you guys like my German, especially you, Hag, I know you're watching, said on Wednesday that he's met with his counterparts from the other G7 countries, and he says that the Facebook project cannot go forward due to regulatory issues are still being dealt with. Bitcoin surged to 1,030 minutes during U.S. trading hours on Thursday after a comment from a U.S. lawmaker said that Bitcoin really can't be killed. And for the week, Bitcoin went down 10.53% at 11,539.70. In financial and banking news, the Greek Finance Ministry reported that the Greek actually had a budget surplus of 430.4 million in the first half of 2019. That's well above target thanks to the higher revenues. Now the new conservative government government is going to be able to move forward with the tax cuts that they wanted to move forward. The IMF on Wednesday stated that the United States dollar is overvalued by 6 to 12% based on near-term economic fundamentals, while the euro, yen, and Chinese yuan are broadly in line of what market fundamentals should be. Commodities for the week, crude oil futures went down. U.S. crude went down 8.29% to 55.74. International crude went down by 6.60%. It's called Brent for those of you guys that are new. It went to 62.74. Tropical storm Barry shut off almost 75% of all of the production in the Gulf of Mexico and further inland as it moved inland. And there's a lot of Chinese economic data fueling concerns about demand growth. So the dollar, obviously, the expectation is that it's going to go down, which affects the oil market. But for the most part, we had a situation where we had to shut off a lot of the production in China, which is now the largest consumer of oil in the world, second largest economy, not very good economic news. So if they're the biggest consumer of oil and there's not I should repeat that. There's not very good economic news coming out of China. That basically means that the demand for oil in China is not as much as it continues to grow over time, or has continued to grow over time. So if there isn't good economic data, that means that the demand for oil is going to go down, which means more surplus, which means that prices are probably going to come down overall. Outside, obviously, of the situation that's going on with Iran in the Middle East. American billionaire investor Ray Dalio thinks the current era of low interest rates in QE might be coming to an end. He says that he sees an escalating conflict between the capitalists and the socialists and recommends gold to investors to reduce risk and enhance returns. I don't know if you guys remember, but I did a video about how I was investing in the silver market. And ven acá, Michael. So this is the silver chart right here. I'm going to show you also one of the miners that I actually invested in. Full disclosure, this is for educational purposes only. I'm not telling you guys to go buy silver, just FYI, right? So if you guys remember, this was the circle right around here. If I can find the indicator that I can draw with real quick, I think it's this one. This is the circle that I was looking at right in here. And you can see it got right into the circle. You guys can go and find the video where I pointed that out to you. You can see the beautiful run and then the explosion to the upside. Now, one of the things that's happening now in the silver market is, notice we had the downtrend and now we're actually seeing a higher high and, a higher high here and a higher low. So now the market has literally changed or starting to move into an uptrend. If I actually show you one of the miners, which is my favorite, I'm not gonna give you guys a name. If you see it here on the video, it's fine, but this is my favorite miner overall. You guys can see that the market is generally respecting the two areas. It's called a wedge. A wedge can be, with an area like this or an area like this, but essentially it's two areas that are compressing against each other. And you guys can see, venga, Michael, you guys can see that the market is literally working in between these two areas, and that's what I've been playing all this time. I moved into minor stocks because I need to trade more longer term with all of the traders that we have, especially at Speed Up, that we have to manage and everything, right? Because you guys know we actually fund traders, so I don't want people to lose our money, basically. So what I want to point out to you here is, if I kind of fast forward, notice that the end, what happens. And if you guys saw what happened with the explosion of silver, this is probably going to go on for another 2 or 3 times or so, but it's going to kind of go back and forth. It could break before then, but essentially if it completes the pattern and it gets down here where it compresses, this is going to be the explosion and what I've been talking about for the last few years, where we're going to see a very, very big uptrend in the precious metals market. Other than that, precious metals are higher for the week. Gold 0.68%, 1,426. Silver is up 6.47%, 1628. In economic news, China's economics slumped to the lowest level of growth since 1992. The quarter 2 GDP dipped to 6.2% from 6.4% in quarter 1. They're feeling the rising, obviously, the rising tensions with the trade war between the United States, and some actually suspect that their numbers are actually worse than those that they're actually reporting. In corporate news, German business software group SAP, Europe's most valuable tech firm, said on Thursday quarter 2 profits dropped 21% to $930 million because of restructuring costs and trade uncertainty. Obviously, the stock fell. Netflix added 2.7 million subscribers in Q2 2019, a bit over half of the 5 million new subscribers that analysts have been expecting. Netflix shares actually fell 11% on the good news to 322 when U.S. markets opened. They lost about 18 billion because of the competition that they're feeling now with the competitors that are starting up as well. Microsoft revenue for Q2, they beat predictions by a near $1 billion due to their commercial cloud division, which includes Azure, which is their servers where people can use to host stuff on, Office 365 and Division 365. They increased 39% from the prior year. The revenue's at $11 billion, and their shares went up to 3.5% in the pre-market on Friday. Their market valuation now is well over $1 trillion. And Boeing said it's going to record a $5 billion after-tax charge in Q2 to give potential concessions to their customers for the disruptions and the delivery delays. Boeing didn't mention how much their litigation costs are going to cost, because obviously they're going to get sued quite a bit because of this fiasco. Trade news, Trump on Monday pointed to the slowing economic growth in China amid restarting trade talks as having a major effect on the Chinese economy and warned that possibly much more can come soon. Europe is expecting that the World Trade Organization is going to give the United States a right to levy tariffs on the EU. It's going to aim at products valued between $5 billion to $7 billion in a 14-year dispute over illegal aircraft subsidies. The U.S. administration is essentially waiting for the go-ahead. If the World Trade Organization said it's okay, they're going to go ahead and apply the tariffs against the EU immediately. Russia is going to be prepared to join the EU payment system called INSTEX, INSTEX, and that's going to basically a payment system that's going to allow people to circumvent the U.S. payment system, which is the only one at the moment to go ahead and circumvent the U.S. sanctions. The U.S. or Russia wanted the EU to expand the mechanism over oil imports as well. Billionaire Peter Thiel, which is the co-founder of PayPal and one of Trump's top Silicon Valley supporters and donors, is hitting at Google pretty hard because he's saying that a lot of tech firms are Google specifically Google basically is helping international companies or international countries, but not the U.S. They're making agreements and helping out China, he's saying, but they're canceling a military contract with the United States government. So essentially, he's just hitting out at Google and other tech firms because of that. Remember, since this is a little bit political, I never want to get political on this show. On this program, I'm always going to make sure that I'm zero politics. I think we're all kind of fed up with the politics in this country, in the United States, even internationally. So it doesn't matter if you love Trump, hate Trump, love Obama, hate Obama, left, right, purple, yellow, whatever you are. I'm always just going to keep it to the facts, okay? Just want to remind you guys of that. Elon Musk's firm Neuralink says that it's ready for brain surgery. The startup unveiled a plan to implant paralyzed patients with electrodes to be able to go ahead and control computers with their minds. It does still need FDA approval. In investment news, Amazon is the target of an antitrust investigation in the EU over its use of merchant data. They're underlining regulators' increased focus on how the technology companies exploit customer information for enhanced profits. U.S. will begin withholding sales of the F-35 jet to Turkey after receiving the new S-400 missile system, defense system from Russia. Lockheed Martin, which is the producer of the F-35, derives around 30% of the revenues from the jet, but they're playing down the fact that, they're just not going to sell it to Turkey anymore. In international events, Chinese foreign ministry states that the government is cutting off business to U.S. firms selling arms to Taiwan, declining to give details of the sanctions. Move is likely going to worsen the already poor ties with the U.S. Millions of people in Northeast India are stranded by flooding. There's a growing concern about growing food and water supplies. Remember that we had that really big situation, the trouble in the Midwest as well, which is the breadbasket of the world, they call it. Vietnamese and Chinese ships have been embroiled in a week-long standoff near an offshore oil block in disputed waters of the South China Sea. So one of the things you guys have to know what's going on right now, if you don't know, picture China in Asia, right? So it should be on this side for you guys. And then there's a sea, and you have all the other countries, the Philippines and Vietnam and Taiwan over here. Essentially what China is doing is there's a international agreement of what your sea should be from the coast, right? So let's just say it's here. So this is China, this is here, and they literally want to take all of this. And it's violating a lot of the international waters of, or the waters that should be of other countries. So the reason why China is doing this is because they want to create a bit of a defensive barrier around the country, because obviously they can't compete with the military might of the United States, the Air Force or the Navy. So if the US does bring their ships and their airplanes and everything, they can literally start to cut them off, you know, and all of these islands that they procured, rather than just right off the coast where, you know, that international barrier. So that's basically what's happening there. The U.S. is reinforcing its controversial military relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's preparing to send hundreds of troops to the country amid increasing tensions with Iran. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard seized a UAE tanker, supposedly they're saying, for smuggling oil in the energy strategic Persian Gulf. They also have taken a British ship and supposedly a second British ship. They did release one ship that they got, but it was from Libya. It wasn't from the UK one. So it seems now that things are escalating, and I don't know if you guys remember, I did a video. So what's going to happen in the next few years, and this is why I recommend you guys that you guys prepare yourselves in one way or another, because things are going to get very bad very soon. So we're going to have this financial crisis, which I would say within about 2 years or so. I was expecting this around 2019, 2020, but due to the manipulation with governments, now Trump wanting to get reelected, obviously they're going to try to limp it along until that point. And then after the Trump election, the election, whether Trump wins or not, we're going to see the huge drop in the market. So we're going to have this financial crisis. After that, the governments are going to try to do the same thing as they did in 2008 to save the system. Then we're going to have a debt crisis. And then after that, I was expecting, you know, the situation with the war with Iran, maybe 7-10 years out. Now it seems that we might have an escalation. So there may be a situation now where if Trump does win, or whoever wins in the second term, if Trump does win, we have a higher probability that we're going to have a war, some kind of standoff with Iran because of what's happening. Other than that, in unusual facts this week, a swath of New York City plunged into darkness without electricity. 73,000 people in Manhattan West Side, including Subway stores and theaters, lost power. The main utility company called Con Edison restored electricity within hours. Governor Cuomo is saying that he's going to order investigation into the event. Disney's Lion King made a almost $55 million opening in its China debut, higher than openings of Jungle Book, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin. Very strong opening abroad despite the mixed reviews of the critics. The North American debut was this Friday, and it's expected to make 175 to 200 million in its opening weekend. The British Royals officials, clad in scarlet outfits, went to the River Thames to count the swan upping ceremony, where they count the swans owned by the Queen. Wonder how much the UK taxpayer paid for that. Nestle found a way using a patented technique to create chocolate without adding any sugar, which is really interesting. They're relying on the leftover material from cocoa plants for sweetening, and consumers look for a natural, obviously they're starting to look more for a natural and healthier fare. In France's Bernard Arnault's LVMH, the luxury good maker, which has companies like Christian Dior and Louis Vuitton and Sephora, his net worth has pushed to $107.6 billion, 200 million ahead of Bill Gates. He's now the second richest person in the world. In 2019, his net worth went up by $39 billion. It's the biggest individual gain of all the billionaires. And keep in mind that Gates actually gave away $32 billion of his wealth since his retirement as CEO. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next week.